You have to know this. The fact that I'm here matters. The fact that you're there matters. This is no accident. None of us are.
If you do not have style, you just say, well, here I am, you know, as a human being. How can I express myself?
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
There is no way around. You have to jump.
And we are calling it iPhone.
نريدها قومة ونهضة إسلامية. I have a dream. It's about yes we can.
وسط هذا الصقيع هنا في موسكو نلتقي بأسخر اللقاءات في برنامج أصحاب السلطة في موسمه الثاني مع المطلوب رقم 1 إدوارد سنودن. إدوارد سنودن الرجل الذي كرس حياته ومنحها من أجل حريتنا نحن في كل مكان حول العالم. واجه أعتى وأصعب وأكبر أجهزة الاستخبارات حول العالم. هو المطلوب رقم 1 ليس لأنه اقترف جرما وقتل أشخاص، بل لأنه دافع عن حقوق الخصوصية. ولأننا كسبنا ثقته بالموسم الأول نعود لنكون المذياع العربي الأول الذي يلتقي به وجها لوجه هنا في موسكو.
No, I don't think Mr. Snowden was a patriot.
نص ساعة متأخر يا محمد.
I think he's a total traitor, and I would deal with him harshly.
أكيد أنت قايل الوقت صح.
I would prefer to see him hanged by the neck until he's dead rather than merely electrocuted.
If he is as proud of or as secure in his belief that what he did was the right thing, he should come home and defend it.
Oliver Stone is making headlines yet again for his controversial new film, Snowden.
أدري بس تأخر. يلا.
Will Russia give Edward Snowden asylum?
Don't shout at me, please.
المهم أنت مجهز الإضاءة وليد على لو صار الليل؟
The first time I think it was publicly shown was when Edward Snowden made it to Russia.
لازم أحد يفتح الباب. Hello, Edward. No problem. Come in. We're already recording, because we waited. And of course, if you're waiting for Edward Snowden, the minute is that half an hour. Sorry. Thank you for trusting us, and thank you for this opportunity. And at last, face to face with Edward Snowden.
So nice to meet you.
Yes. Thank you again, Mr. Edward, for this opportunity. And let me remind you of one thing that I've told you when we've met last time, that I remember how people stood up and clapped by the end of the movie that Oliver Stone did on Snowden, of course. This time I came with a different news. I remember the first comment I received after airing the episode. One of my friends, he's a doctor, he said that he would vote for you as the president of the world because he feels that you represent not only a type of people or people in a certain country. You represent what every human should have, which is the voice. So thank you again for this opportunity. And I wanted to start with you with one of your quotes where you said some of the American government actions in China and Russia made fear a common value and the most value that affect people decisions. How can you comment on that, or how you can clarify this?
So this is becoming a global situation. We see it happening not just in the United States, we see it happening in Russia, we see it happening in the Middle East, we see it happening in Latin America and China, where the most powerful parties in a political situation, the status quo, are using fear as a political tool. It's becoming the most common shared value across borders, across languages, and it's because they realize it's powerful and it's easy. These officials can make an allegation. You're in danger. your children are in danger. And unless you vote for us, unless you give us more power, unless you excuse our scandals and look the other way, your family will pay a price. But because now they say we have new tools, such as surveillance, but these tools are secret, they say, well, we can't show you the evidence. You simply have to trust us that this is the case. But the problem becomes when we see where this dynamic can take a very strong, very developed society like the United States before the year 2000 to now in 2018, war began in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it never ended. And it's this kind of natural momentum that we need to guard open societies, free societies, peaceful societies against, because if we make it too easy to enter into conflict, it doesn't even have to be a war, but any kind of armed conflict, we are giving the most powerful people in our society an ability to steer our society using fear that they will be very reluctant to put away and say the war is over, the conflict is finished, we've won. It's much better for political parties, for political structures, for these forces in society to say, well, the war isn't finished yet. We're closer, we're making progress, but we're not done. And if you ask them, when will they be done, they never have an answer.
Understood, but still, you talked about secrecy too. And you've just mentioned how things are done in a secret way. But isn't that relevant to and similar to what you've done? You didn't release any information. Yes, you were the source and you had thousands of files, but you didn't give it away. So what's the difference here? If it is not necessary to have those information as a secret thing, then why did you kept it as a secret?
It's a great question. The reason why I did is because I'm not a government. I was not elected. So I felt a special obligation to minimize any possible risks. I knew I would be attacked quite strongly by my government and criticized as some kind of information terrorist. So what I did was I gathered evidence of government wrongdoing, crimes, both against the people of my country and the people of the world. And rather than putting this information just openly on the internet, which I could have done in an afternoon, I'm a technologist by trade, I gave this information to journalists. And I said, you have to take from me the decision of what should be made public. But as a condition of receiving this information, you won't simply publish things because they're interesting, because they're news. You'll only publish stories that you're willing to stake your newspaper's reputation that this is a matter of public interest. Not just that the public would be interested in knowing this, but the public needs to know this. And that's the reason that I did this, was to minimize any potential risks while maximizing the public benefit. Now, there's a presumption here that this was necessary. And I'm not sure that's true. I did this because I wanted to be as careful as possible, because who am I? I'm a young man. I could have made a mistake. I could be wrong. I could be crazy. Maybe I made all of this up in my head. But this happened in 2013. We're now living in 2018. And despite 5 years of investigation and criticism by my government, they have never shown even a single case of a person being harmed as a result of these disclosures. And this is the argument that I would make when we ask about sort of secrecy and transparency. Where should the balance be? If my government, right, the richest government, could say, none of this can be publicly known, or the United States will be destroyed, people will die, terrorists will get through. And after 5 years, they can't show that that ever happened. How many other things that are being kept secret today that we still don't know about today could be made public, also without harm, but making the public more involved in our democracy?
I totally understand, but still, from your point of view, you didn't know what should be released and what should be not. You kept that decision on newspapers, and
Yes.
still, newspaper, respected newspaper, as you said, didn't reveal all those leaks.
It's true.
Right? So maybe that's the reason behind some secrecy. Maybe the government see different angles because because of the leaks that happened, the government they apologize for different governments all over the world because of what you've done. So apologizing is something that maybe a government like America doesn't want to do. So you forced them to do so. So secrecy, and because this is also what you repeatedly said also on Twitter and also from your speeches, how, for example, the current president, which is President Trump, that he deals with secrecy. It's his philosophy in solving issues and problems. And you said that he forgets whom he's working for. But still, when do you think that secrecy is respected or is understandable for Edward Snowden?
Okay. So the question, I think that the root of the question is, when is secrecy justified?
Yes.
And we know so many cases when it's not justified. But when I went forward and worked with the journalists, the question is, why did I require them to agree to these conditions? Don't publish everything. Publish only what the public needs to know. And this is because I believe some surveillance can be useful. I'm not saying we should burn down every government, we should close every police department. Of course not. There are dangerous people in the world. There are real criminals out there who we need to defend against, who we need to try to intercept and stop their plans. But how do we draw that balance? And I would argue the way that we do this is, in an open society, government has to serve the public. And how do we enforce this? We make the government a partner to the public, rather than the public a servant of the government. Government should be serving the people. And what does this look like in the context of secrecy? What this means is the government does not get to decide behind closed doors in some smoky room what our rights are and how they change from day to day. We, the public, need to understand the powers that the government is claiming, the programs that they're creating to use in our name against others and against us, the public, because they think we maybe have done something wrong. But this is not to say we need to know the names of every person that's under investigation. This does not mean that we need to know every sort of terrorist operation, every military operation, and this is why none of this information has been published, at least from my work in the last several years. But the powers, the general programs, need to be evaluated to understand, are they lawful? Are these things coherent with our rights? Are they consistent with our values in our society? Or are they the way they have been in the last 20 years of American history, where we've run a secret torture program? We have run a killing program where no courts are involved. Only the president says this person must die, which I hate to say it, but people in the Middle East are far more familiar with this than people in the United States. For the United States, they go, oh, you know, these are faraway people, they're criminals, they're terrorists. But even if the person who is being targeted is legitimately a terrorist, 100% of the time, and this is putting an incredible amount of faith in the US government to say that's true. Even if that's true, what about the person who's in the same building when the bomb falls? What about the child who's playing in the street when the bomb falls? And this is the legacy of the Obama administration, which people don't know in my country, even though it's public, because the media doesn't like to talk about it. We think about George Bush, right, as sort of the guy who declared war on the world. And we think of President Bush as the one who made drone strikes a regular policy. But Barack Obama has authorized 10 times as many drone strikes during his 8 years in office as President Bush did. In 2016, Barack Obama authorized 26,171 drone strikes in 1 year. That means every 8 hours, I think, or no, every hour, actually, there are 3 bombs falling.
Oh.
Every hour. When you go to sleep, 24 strikes have occurred if you sleep just 8 hours. And when this happens again and again and again, what this does, and remember, all of these strikes take place in secrecy under the policies of my government, it means people can be killed without the involvement of courts, without any measurement of their guilt or innocence, only based on the president making a finding, we believe this person needs to die. Now, maybe the president's right. Maybe this person is a bad person. But 100% of the time, is he always right? And what about all of those others? I think this is where we start to get to that divide between what must be secret and what needs to be known. There was a time when even the occurrence of these strikes, the fact that we had these weapons, was a secret. Was that right?
رغم أنه يعيش بظلال الكرملين وبحماية الأراضي الروسية بعيدا كل البعد عن الأراضي الأمريكية، إلا أنه ما زال متمسكا بذاك الحب الأول، أمريكا ومفاهيمها، وأشدها مفهوم الديمقراطية. ورغم ذلك كله إلا أنه صاحب مقولة، وهي لو كانت الأغلبية بصف وجهة نظرك الخاطئة فلن يحول ذلك الخطأ إلى صواب بمبرر الأغلبية. I can understand what you're saying, and we'll be talking about especially the Obama's administration, where your friend Oliver Stone said that he is a wolf wearing a sheep cloth, as he likes to play around with presidents. But before that, I can't understand how could America be the country that represents democracy and do exactly the opposite of democracy. As being a member of that government, you've witnessed that. So just clarify this point for me. How is it possible a country that do all those wars, all those bombs by the name of democracy and freedom, and at the same time you're saying that they're the opposite of democracy? Can you clarify this point especially?
Yeah, so this is a complex political topic, but the idea is the United States government is very sophisticated, very organized, very rich.
Yes.
And our system of government is we have 3 branches. We have the courts, we have the lawmakers, and we have the president. They are supposed to compete against each other. The courts are supposed to restrain the president. The Congress is supposed to make the laws that restrain the courts. And the president is supposed to execute the laws and make sure they follow the line. All of these people are supposed to be selected by the public broadly, and they're supposed to represent the public. But there's a problem that has corrupted the process in the United States in a large way, and that is, again, fear. That same fear we talked about earlier. All of those lawmakers, after September 11th, the terrorist attack, felt that if they said, wait, let's look at the evidence, let's see what happened, let's see who is actually responsible for this, they would be attacked by the other people who realized fear was powerful. They would lose an election, they would no longer be in there, they would lose their voice. So it was easier to simply go along with any vote. And this is why the United States invaded Iraq, which had nothing to do with September 11th. Saying Iraq has nuclear weapons and things like that, which of course didn't exist. The courts, who are in the United States still the strongest sort of public serving branch of government. Our Congress is hopelessly corrupt. Our president is Donald Trump. What more needs to be said? The courts are still troubled by this idea of executive privilege. This is sort of a very American topic, but the idea is the president needs to be given the benefit of the doubt. We have to trust the president. And if the president says the courts shouldn't have a role in deciding this because it's related to the national security of the United States, And if the courts get involved, they can't understand the complexity of these issues because the courts don't own the NSA, the CIA, the FBI. Only the president does. The courts will decide wrongly. Traditionally, in hundreds of years of U.S. history, this has not been commonplace. It has not been commonly abused. But in the last 50 years of U.S. history, it has become very routine, where the president says, I'm carrying out some program to the courts. You should not review whether this program is legal or illegal because it intrudes upon my powers. But this is the entire purpose of our courts. And because of this, the president can carry out a program for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, before the courts finally go, all right, there's enough evidence in the public that even if we take the president at his word, we know that his claims can't be true, not because he's evil, not because he's a liar, but simply because the facts don't add up. And clearly we have to make some decision here. But the problem is, when it takes 10 years to get an issue into court, and we're talking about programs of life and death, we're talking about secret prisons, we're talking about torture, what does this mean for the victims, right? They say justice delayed is justice denied. And this is very true here, but I don't want people to think the United States is a lost cause, that the people don't believe in democracy. People in the United States, I think, have incredibly strong values. I think they believe in democracy as a part of their core identity. Even the ones who don't really understand democracy, they hear the word democracy and it sounds good to them because it's a part of what America stands for, right? America does not want to be the bad guy. Contrary to that, America wants to be the good guy so badly that it will get involved in problems that it has nothing to do with, that was a mistake to get involved with. But the issue becomes, what happens when the people feel differently from the people in power? And that's what we're seeing today. And the question is, how do we fix this?
And talking about fixing it, isn't this way, which is that the president, after being elected, has the right to take the decisions, to use the power that is there in the government, such as a rich country and powerful country with its programs? Isn't that acceptable? Isn't that it makes sense that majority shouldn't be taking every single decision? And this is part of democracy. So don't you think that this is a right thing to do? Do you think it makes sense if majority takes the opinion of every single war, every single attack, every single... You're asking about something that is not doable.
It's a perfect question. So we have the election. We have a new president. Everything's over. Everything's finished, right? Decisions are made by the president. Everyone's happy. But do we have a president or do we have a king? What are the limits on government, even when a leader has a democratic mandate? And this is where we begin talking about fundamental rights, basic laws, our constitutions that limit even presidents. And what happens when we have presidents who don't abide by that? In the United States, theoretically, only the president and Congress together declare war. And yet the United States bombs so many countries now that it has not declared war on. It's difficult to keep count of them. When we talk about these mass surveillance programs that in 2013 were revealed, whether we're talking about the surveillance of Americans domestically or people overseas, our Constitution prohibits the invasion of privacy against people who there is not an individual suspicion that they have done something wrong. Now, this is both the search of their communications, you can think of sort of opening someone's mail, but also the seizure of their communications, meaning they can't take your letter to begin with and look at it. Well, the government was doing both. And so this is the question. If we have a president, how do we constrain that president in a way that gives them the power to do what is necessary while also preventing them from engaging activities that are not only unnecessary but immoral, unlawful, unethical, dangerous. And this is supposed to be our constitutional system, but this is what's in danger today.
This is the serious hemorrhaging of legitimate American secrets in the history of my country.
It's about privacy of internet!
Talking now about presidents leads me to talk about the elections, which you had a role in the last election, especially when it's all about leaks and hacks. One of the team members here said that it might be something, a vibe that Snowden started in the US. It was him in 2013, and in the next election, both presidents are facing two things. Two candidates are facing the same thing, which is hacks, scandals, and also Russia involvement. So we'll be talking about this, starting with the hacks on the Democratic Party. Don't you think that now elections have changed the choice of people? Many parties are involved in such a thing, especially using social media platforms.
Yeah, I mean, the topic of the last election in the United States is extraordinarily complex, precisely because there were so many players operating in this environment. And it was a special election because we had the two least popular candidates in modern American history, both running for president. Normally, you think about elections as a popularity contest. Whoever is most popular wins. But this was actually sort of different. Both sides, the Republican and the Democratic candidates, were trying to be the least unpopular. They wanted the other candidate to be more hated. And of course, in this dynamic, in this environment, we saw the revelation of emails from inside campaigns. We saw a media campaign by Donald Trump against the media, where he said the press is the enemy, and on and on.
I remember 2 points were relevant, especially with the Hillary Clinton campaign, which is using the Signal app, which you recommended 3 or 4 years ago, and also the tweet that you've said against Trump accusation that how is it possible in 8 days to go through the emails that was related also to Hillary's points that maybe she lost because of that. By participating in such a thing shows that you still believe in the system. Isn't that right?
I think it's a question of do I believe that election was likely to provide a positive outcome for the country is a separate issue than do I think we have to have elections, we have to try to do the best we can within our system. And it is an important question to go when we have election systems that are being degraded, processes that are being corrupted, money being invested in campaigns that we don't know where it's coming from. And it's increasingly becoming a question of whoever has the most money, has the most power in American society. Is this consistent with our values? Is this the way it should be? Is this the direction that we want to go? And I think it is very much an open question. But do I think we should have elections? Absolutely.
For sure, yes.
But I think we can do better. I think the last election was really the story of what happens when you elect some of the least popular people in American society, who both have long scandals, long histories of different kinds of improprieties. How is it possible that in a nation of 330 million people, this is the best we can do?
This is politics and this is democracy. They didn't come from anywhere and forced on. This is democracy all about. And it has been there. It brings different president with the same reputation. Don't you think this happened years ago, like Bush, like Obama, as you said?
Well, it is a question, but the book that you have there, I haven't read it entirely, but I know Donna Brazil, she said that the primary to choose who would be the Democratic candidate was unfairly slanted in favor of Hillary Clinton and against the others. Is that a functioning democracy, right? Is that the process as it's designed, or is that a process that is being corrupted to benefit one segment of society at the expense of another?
And going back to the book, how it talks about the influence of the subject of the emails, and you have even, it was a shock for me, how you thought about WikiLeaks and their role in that period of time related to the subject of emails. You always said that WikiLeaks is democratizing the information and how good they are, to how they attribute good things as knowledge, but still you called they created hostility. This is exactly what you've said when they use this certain subject when it comes to emails. Till this moment, I can't understand what is your thin line from using or taking out the information. I want to understand your way of choosing what to say, when to say that. So those are emails, and this is a scandal that the people should know about. A suggested president, she might be the president. So people need to know what's happening. But you thought otherwise.
I don't think that's true unless you have a specific quote. I'm not familiar with that. What I say is WikiLeaks' model is different from my own. It's not my own. I don't say WikiLeaks is better or worse, but I have a choice and I have a system of principles and values that I wanted journalists to try to abide by, to minimize the risks while maximizing the public gain. WikiLeaks has a more aggressive model. They're comfortable with taking more risks. And so in this way, they can go further because they believe in sort of freedom of information at all costs. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe WikiLeaks is right. Maybe WikiLeaks is wrong and I'm right. Time will tell, right? But in the context of the election, the publication of emails, I don't believe I was critical of that specifically because no one in the United States who is a serious figure believes that these emails were not newsworthy. Every major newspaper in the United States reported on these emails again and again, consistently throughout the election cycle, specifically because, as you say, they were relevant. They were about a presidential candidate and perhaps the most powerful and well-connected presidential candidate that we've seen in a generation. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with everything that WikiLeaks has done. There have been cases in some disclosures where I think maybe it would have been better to review the information internally to WikiLeaks, working with partner journalists, as they originally did many years ago, and had those papers run reporting without providing sort of this giant compilation of all of these files, which may not have much public interest information in them. But this is where the distinction derives. They go, well, maybe there's something in that giant pile of information that doesn't look so interesting, that in fact is very important. But we, WikiLeaks, couldn't recognize it. These journalists couldn't recognize it. But some person on the internet who's some specialist in some different country can recognize it because they're involved in this issue. It's their expertise. Whereas if you go with a model like the one that I followed, where you don't reveal all of the raw information, there's no possibility that if the journalists reporting on this closed information didn't recognize something, someone else has the opportunity. So it's a balancing, really. I'm on the more conservative side of that. WikiLeaks is on the more aggressive side of that. Which is correct? Time will tell.
You've asked me whether if there is a certain quote. So here where you talked about, I have the tweet in front of me talking about how WikiLeaks has helped, but their hostility to even, and they even replied you by saying that you're seeking a pardon from Clinton.
Of course.
So maybe you remember that. Now you are a different school. You're not WikiLeaks. You are, as you said, a private, personal voice. But how are you living now, Edward Snowden? Now, we had in one of the reports in BBC, they're not sure, but they're saying that you're part of a security company here in Russia. What do you do for a living?
I'm the president of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, which is actually an American organization. My life, it's funny, my life before was all about creating systems and using them to spy on people's communications. Now my work is to enable people's communications to occur without being spied on. I'm creating new tools, particularly focused on that relationship between journalists and their sources, such as Secure Drop, which is a Freedom of the Press Foundation project, where we allow anyone from anywhere who's completely unknown to provide safely and secretly documents to journalists. If they want to identify themselves and say, my name is this, you can contact me here with questions, they could. But they can also just anonymously say, look at this. And the journalists can see it. They can try to validate if it's true. And if it is, they can run a story on it. And this is important because in a world where increasingly everything is being monitored, everything is being collected, what that means is we are being forced to live naked in a new way. We are being observed and monitored and sort of recorded as our communications cross the internet, electronically naked or unencrypted. And until we learn to encrypt them, to clothe them so not everything can be seen, we can keep something of ourselves to ourselves, we are vulnerable. Encryption is not about wrongdoing or criminality. It is about dignity and recognizing that people have a fundamental right to communicate because humans are social creatures. And without each other, we have no family, we have no tribe, we have no community, we have no society. And it's true that there are arguments from governments, from particularly spies, who go, well, if people are able to communicate without being spied on, maybe they'll be engaged in some plot. Maybe they'll plan some attack. Maybe they'll abuse these powers. And it's true that some tiny fraction of people out there are bad. And they will abuse this power, just as they've abused cars to get away from crimes, just as they've abused guns, just as they've abused writing for propaganda and for radicalizing people. Every technology will be abused. The question is, for us as humans, do we have faith that a new technology will be used more often for good than for evil? And if we don't believe that, we might as well pack up and go home because the game is done.
Maybe that's because of your background. If it wasn't your, if it wasn't your girlfriend, you may still the Republican side. She changed you, isn't that true?
So I was never sort of strictly a Republican, as you would say, but certainly more conservative. I worked for the CIA. They're looking for a certain kind of person. But yes, the love of my life, the woman I've been with for so many years, she is very progressive. She's very liberal, and I don't mean that in the sort of Democratic Party sense. The Democratic Party does not have a monopoly on these ideas, and unfortunately, increasingly, they don't really represent progressive ideas. But it's through meeting people and coming to understand people that we come to understand ourselves. And what had happened was I had inherited a belief from my family, from my community, from my workplace, that I hadn't really questioned, that I hadn't really tested. And through the people around me, and fortunately through the woman I love, I was able to find those questions. And when I found those questions, they led me to answers that changed my mind about so many things.
كيف لرجل ينفذ بجلده هاربا من وطنه لاجئا لبلد خصم أو عدو لدود بطلا في أعين أغلبية شعبه؟ كيف لمجرم يراه المثقفين والمنادين بالتمسك بدستور أحد الأبطال؟ كيف لمجرم يلقى أعلى الأوسمة الصحفية والتأييد من الصحافة من حول العالم؟ يرد إدوارد سنودن بكل بساطة: قد يكون أحيانا الخيار الأخلاقي الوحيد هو كسر القانون. You are a person that always relies on morals, and this is what you always defend, even when you broke the law, even when you became a criminal, running away from your government. You said that sometimes in certain situations, breaking the law is the only moral choice. It makes sense when I hear it this way. But how is it possible to give every person the right to decide whether what he's done is moral and he has the right reason to break the law? Can you clarify this?
I think the way to understand that question is, how can we have a free world in which people don't? The idea is, if we have governments of truly irresistible power, where they say this is the law, and the moment anybody challenges that, the moment any time goes beyond that, the moment someone presses the gas pedal on their car a few kilometers per hour too high, and the police are immediately there, they're marched off to jail, there is no room for progress in society. And that sounds strange when we're talking about speeding tickets. But when we think about history, when we think about slavery, when we think about genocide, when we think about women having the right to vote, all of these activities, it was legal to prevent women from voting. It was legal to own another human being. It was legal to exterminate entire populations of people under these regimes. At the same time, it was absolutely wrong. But in order to change those policies, someone had to stand against them. Someone had to say, it does not matter what the law says if the law has become a different thing from justice. And all of these things that have become the world we have today, where these things now are no longer legal, began from a single act of dissent. And I think if we lose that understanding that sometimes the only moral decision is to break the law, we have lost something much more valuable to the human condition than a policy, a rule, a law. We have lost liberty. We have lost our ability to advance, because all of that derives from the human power, capability to say, I'm sorry, I understand your reasoning, I understand your system, but I don't agree.
I understand exactly what you're trying to say, Edward. As you said, many good examples before, like Malcolm X and all those people that did huge difference in the progress of the democracy in America. Now, Malcolm X did this, and Edward Snowden did this, and they both were right in breaking the law because it was the only moral thing to do. But do I have the capability to do so? Anyone has the what is the minimum understanding that gives the person the right to break the law when he feels that it's the only moral thing to do?
Risk. It's very easy to look at me today and see that I live freely and go, oh, you know, this person, they faced no danger. We can't have 1,000 Edward Snowdens, 10,000 Edward Snowdens. Everyone can't be like this because society will collapse. But I face, and faced before much more clearly, life in prison or possibly worse. The current president of the United States has said I should be executed. His CIA director wants me dead still today. All of his political allies say the same thing. The person that he's been whispering to have nominated for his chief diplomat says I should be hanged by the neck. And that's a diplomat, right, allegedly. The idea becomes, are you willing to risk that? What happens if you fail? What happens if no one agrees with you? What happens if you were wrong?
Yes.
And the answer is the world will provide the ultimate decision, even if a particular national court or city court does not. Just because I'm not in a prison in the United States does not mean that I have not been judged. The fact that you're here asking questions of me sort of politely instead of throwing knives across the table at me means that you, in a small way, have judged me. Your newspaper, your channel, your institution, your society has judged me. Now, we all have to wait to see the final judgment. But there is a natural limitation on these kind of decisions, which is, what are you willing to lose? I can no longer go home. I can no longer see my family so easily. I lost my career and will never be able to work in the way that I once did. I have strong political feelings about my country, and I want to help my country, but I will not be able to meaningfully participate in the political process there. These are all things that I have given up, and very likely I will never get again. But was it worth it?
Yes.
I believe that I came forward because my government, not just that they were wrong, that they were actively harming, not just the government itself, but the people of my country, what our country stands for, how it is viewed in the world. And I believe we could do better. I believe we still can do better. And I believe that as a result of coming forward, we have done better. Now, the problem is not fixed. Not everything is resolved, right? We still see surveillance getting worse in many ways. We're still mired in these wars. But in at least some small ways, we have made progress. Those courts that we spent so much time talking about earlier, for the first time in 40 years, limited the powers of American spies instead of expanding them. And that is something from which we can build further, but only when we as a society recognize that just because the president sits in the highest chair does not mean everything he says is true or correct or right.
And this is one of the things that was achieved because of you. And this book, it was mentioned, your name was mentioned, of course, you're always relevant when it comes to presidents in America. How people know Pfizer because of you. Know what's happening behind those doors because of you. And this is what everyone believes. But for me to talk about what you achieved is still questionable, is that what you really lost. You've talked about losing, going back home to your country, to your family. But what else have you lost? What's your program here in Russia? I know that you left Hawaii, the warm weather, to this icy weather. What else? What have you really lost?
Well, this is one of the beautiful things about being a technologist in the times that we're living. People think, you know, it's a terrible tragedy because I'm trapped in Russia.
Yes.
My government canceled my passport when I was en route to Latin America. I didn't choose Russia. Secretary of State John Kerry canceled my passport and meant that I could not leave. But I don't really live in Russia. I sleep in Russia. I live on the internet. I live in so many different countries around the world. Just 2 days ago, I was speaking in Berlin. Before that, I'm speaking in the United States in universities. Then I'll be speaking in a place like Panama. Maybe I'll be speaking in a place like Kuwait. You know, it's a beautiful thing because these old bad tools of political repression, like exile, were created because they allowed governments to go, all right, you know, we won't be able to execute this person. We won't be able to use them as an example and throw them in the dungeon. But we won't have to hear from them anymore either. Maybe that's okay. But now, they can't stop us from speaking. And that's a change. And this is the new story of my life. Can I create the tools that allow others, Chinese dissidents, Russian dissidents, so many other people, to speak out wherever they are, to realize if they're being targeted by secret services, to realize if they're being exploited, if they're in danger, if they're at risk of disappearance, of being marched out into the dark and never seen again, so that they can leave some trace behind. And most critically, I learned from my own experience that to disagree, even to have evidence, means nothing unless journalists have the ability to show the public what the facts are. And to do that, they have to be in contact with sources of information that can show them this is what's going on. They can do this secretly, even when it's against the law, because if you don't have the facts, you don't understand the world. The public is no longer partner to government, but subordinate to government. And when I look at the world, I go, governments were designed to serve the people, not to be served by them. Who should the government really be working for?
Edward, when you talk about how the world is smaller, you're sleeping in Russia, as you said, but you're in Berlin yesterday and in different countries through those social platforms and through internet. That leads me to a point where knowing the real concept behind that, we had the chance this season to meet Chad Hurley, which is the founder of YouTube, and how he talked about democratizing the content, the videos, and giving the chance for the people to have their own voice, as you always keep asking people to do. But still, knowing that after, of course, what you've done, knowing how those companies are gathering that much information, AT&T, for example, since 1987, you said that they have all the records till that day. What do you think is that the reason behind this evaluation, big evaluation financially for those companies? Do you think that's the reason?
Absolutely. When we think about why these companies such as Google, Facebook are receiving these ridiculous valuations, it's because the understanding of people's lives that they have, because people rely upon these tools every day. When you have a question, who do you ask? You know, maybe you ask your wife, maybe you ask your husband, your father. But if they don't know immediately, you ask Google.
Google, of course.
And Google has a record of every question that you've ever asked to it. When they can make themselves so central to your lives, when they can record everything that you've ever sort of asked, everywhere that your cell phone has ever traveled, this isn't about data. This is about power. This is about influence. It's the ability to say, this is who this person is, that person is, in an entire city, in an entire country, and to sell this power, to rent it to other people, to other groups. Today they're advertisers. In 10 years, who knows who they'll be. We know that they shared this information with the United States government beyond what the law required. This was part of the 2013 mass surveillance revelations. But these are not governmental institutions. They're private companies. And they can say, we can do whatever we want with this. And the question is, who will stop them?
Don't we agree on rules and regulations, or what do they call it? Do you agree and we press we press the agree button? Don't people are agreeing to share those informations?
Yes, so this is the central argument that the companies would make, and they would say, this is a voluntary service. You don't have to use Google, you don't have to use YouTube, you don't have to use Facebook, you don't have to use our telecommunications company, you don't have to use our phone service, you don't have to use our internet service. But the question is, when you don't use any of these, can you participate meaningfully in modern life? So many people today in large cities don't own a car. They use a ride-sharing service, right? So many people, when they have a question, don't even know where the library is to go. And when we start talking about things like job sites, where you're looking for a place to work, they go, well, you have to agree to our terms or you can't see our jobs. Now you can't work. Where does this leave you, right? And there have been studies done that show these agreements that we click yes, okay, every time we want to access some site are so long and they change so frequently that even if you wanted to read all of them, they've said that there are more pages of agreements that the average American encounters per year, which is probably the same for every other country, than there are hours in the year with which you can read them. So how can it be that we can meaningfully be agreeing to things that we cannot possibly have read, that are constantly changing, that require a level of legal expertise to understand that is far beyond the average lawyer, much less the average person, because they're written by the best, most skillful lawyers that money can buy. What we're actually seeing is an imbalance of power where the public are being told they have a choice. They're being given a button because that gives them the illusion of choice. But that choice is not meaningful.
And then you think it's a struggle that both parties have a share to win, either going through maintaining privacy or surrendering, as how I believe that the world is going to award. But it's always good to have faith in what you believe in. Talking about voice, you always repeatedly said this, and people might understand that it is always related to whistleblower or to say where do they see something wrong. Is that what you've meant, or you try to describe voice in a bigger scale?
Voice is a bigger scale. It actually gets into this dynamic that you just talked about the world as we have it and the world as it could be. The question is, how will we get that different world? It's never going to happen. When I was sitting at the NSA and I was aware that my government was violating the rights, not of millions of people, but of billions, I knew what the costs would be. I actually predicted on camera the exact law that they would charge me under. And of course, I'm human like everyone else. You know, I liked where I was, living in a happy situation. I had a lot of money for someone with very few academic achievements, living in Hawaii, a paradise. What would it take for you to give that up, you know? So of course you wait for someone else to come forward. You wait for someone else to come forward. You wait for a new official. You wait for a new president. You wait for someone else to fix the problem so you don't have to pay for it. But the problem is, you can't wait forever. You know, we're looking for a hero. You know, one of these figures from history who sort of strides out and fixes all our problems, but there are no heroes. There are only heroic decisions. There are only heroic moments where we realize what the costs are. And we do something good for once in our life, something better than what we are capable of. And then we go back to being the ordinary person that we are until we come to that next juncture, until we come to that next decision. You are never more than one decision away from being the kind of person that you want to be. And this is what I mean by voice. Recognizing that you have the power not just to influence other people and change their minds, but to influence yourself just by losing your fear of speaking out, losing your fear of standing up, not even forever, not even in every situation, but just for one shining moment, to say, I can be better than I was one moment ago. Maybe I'll only be better for 1 minute, maybe I'll be better for 1 hour, maybe I'll be better for 1 day, but I will be better. And that will make everything better for everyone.
I know that you know that we respect your voice. And that's why we're really feeling honored to have this opportunity. And I also wanted to remind you of a promise that I gave you by the end of our last episode, when I told you that hopefully I'll see you one day in Kuwait and give you that ship. Even Mr. Oliver Stone remembered that shot when I interviewed him this season. He said, yeah, I saw that episode and I hope you keep your word towards Snowden. So I'm here, Oliver Stone, he needs to know that I'm here to deliver my word. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for giving us a voice. Thank you for being relevant always. For us, in our eyes, we don't see you as a source of information in 2013. We see you as someone always relevant, always giving people voice. So thank you for this opportunity. This is the ship, but we've upgraded our ship, so it's gold now. You know, when I gave this to Oliver Stone, this is for you, of course.
Thank you.
And when we gave this to Oliver Stone, you can keep it.
Okay.
He said, is it gold? I answered him, no, of course. He said, oh, then I can't sell it. He's a very honest guy, and he's sometimes maybe rude, but he's always saying the right thing. And that's why he reflected your story in a very amazing way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. في لقائي مع المطلوب رقم 1 في العالم سألته عن معادلته الخطيرة والمعقدة بذات الوقت. كيف لرجل أن يكسر القانون بمبرر المبدأ والأخلاق وأن يتحول إلى بطل؟ ما هو المؤهل المطلوب لأن يحقق هذه النتيجة؟ فقال بكل بساطة أن يكون مستعدا لأخذ المخاطرة. وعندما سألته عن مفهوم الديمقراطية في أمريكا وعن آخر تجاربهم الديمقراطية بالانتخابات الرئيسية، أجاب بأنها كانت منافسة ما بين أخف الضررين. وعندما سألته عن الحالة الديمقراطية التي تعيشها أمريكا، قال رغم أن أمريكا هي المصدر للديمقراطية حول العالم، إلا أنهم الرقم 1 في اختراق حريات الناس وخصوصياتهم. لقاء ساخن مليء بالمخاطر وسط هذه الأجواء الثلجية هنا في موسكو. شكرا على المتابعة.